started. As I said, this will probably take about half an hour. And if you've got questions, we can cover those at the end. Last fall, I was fortunate enough to do this hike across northern England. It's called the Coast to Coast Path. It's now considered the most popular hiking path in England. So doing it in September was a good idea because it wasn't quite so crowded, but it was also a great time to do it. The idea, though, for doing this started 30 years before. I'd been teaching in Bhutan. At the end of my 2 years, the NGO I was working for gave me $2,000 as a resettlement allowance. The idea was that money would tide me over till I was able to find another job. But being young and foolish, I decided to spend all the money backpacking around Europe. And one of the places I really wanted to see was the Lake District in England, because I was an English major and I had studied the poetry of William Wordsworth, so I really wanted to see that part of the world. So while I was in a youth hostel in Grasmere, I met these two guys with overloaded backpacks. We fell into conversation and they told me they were doing this thing called the Coast to Coast Walk, and it was fairly new then. And what they told me just fascinated me. So I said, well, that's going on my bucket list. One of these days I'm going to have to do that. And 30 years later, I did. So last fall, I finally was able to take the walk. The Coast to Coast Walk, I should point out, is not an official hiking path. The man who invented it back in 1973 was a man who did these hand-lettered, hand-drawn map guidebooks for the Lake District. And he was fed up with how crowded the official hiking paths were. And he thought, you know, we live in England. There's all kinds of hiking paths and bridleways and public rights of way. We could create our own long distance hiking path if we just took the time to look at a map. So that was the challenge he set for himself. And he invented this Coast to Coast Walk. So it goes from the Irish Sea to the North Sea, from St. Bees Head to Robin Hood's Bay. It's about 200 miles long, or about 320 kilometers. And it's been voted the second best long distance walk in the world. And here's the map that he has in his guidebook. You can see that one of the nice things about this path is it goes through 3 national parks. So it goes through the Lake District, which was the place I'd been, and the Yorkshire Dales right in the middle there, and then the North York Moors on the east coast. And it mostly goes through really small little places, little villages. And one of the problems then with walking this route is trying to find a place to stay. So I have to admit, I booked with an agency and they pre-booked all my rooms for me, so I didn't have to have that headache, because you only really go through one big town in the whole walk. And it's a lot of up and down, a lot of up and down. So here's where you start, right on the beach at St. Bees Head. And the tradition has become that you pick up a pebble off the beach, it's a pebble beach, and stick it in your pocket and carry it across the country and then throw it in the sea when you get to the other side. So I did stoop down, pick up a pebble, stick it in my pocket, and it was kind of nice to have it there for the whole walk. This is St. Bees. You can see typical little English village with a pub. This is actually St. Bee. She was an Irish nun who floated across from Ireland and started a convent right here. And that church you see is what's left of her convent. So there's not too much anymore. And St. Bees is also famous for a public school, St. Bees Public School. The most famous alumni is Rowan Atkinson. So Mr. Bean went to school here. I took this picture because I just thought it was interesting. It's a really early depiction of St. George and the Dragon done during Viking times. So just as Christianity was coming into England, somebody made this gate in St. Bees Convent. And here's the actual headland that you have to start on. So you walk, your path goes up along the edge of that cliff for quite a while, and then it curls inland and you start walking across the country. So another picture a little further along. You can kind of see a lighthouse off on the right there. That's kind of where the trail wraps around and starts heading inland. I tried to keep the slides down so that I didn't go on too long. So I've only got a few slides for each stage of the journey. So this is day 2. I'm entering the Lake District now, which is a really hilly, sort of rugged area of North England. It's probably the closest thing they have to wilderness. It's very famous because the lake poets made it famous, but it's also famous just because they teach outward bound courses there, and lots of people in England come here for their holidays. It's very picturesque. So my first day, I was walking alongside of this lake, which is called Ennerdale Water, and at the end of the lake, it narrows down to a river and you start going up into the hills. As you can see, as I walked, the weather got really, really bad, and by lunchtime it was just bucketing down. Now, fortunately, at lunchtime I hit this little youth hostel. It's called the Black Sail Youth Hostel, and it is considered the most remote youth hostel in the British Isles. And when I got there, I decided I'm going to duck in and have my lunch, and I found about 10 other hikers with the same idea. So we just shared lunches and made some tea, and it was quite convivial, but at some point we all had to decide, yeah, we need to keep going. The rain's not going to stop. And from here, you're walking up the valley. And I didn't take too many pictures today because the rain really was coming down, but the next stage was a series of zigzag stone steps that went up the face of this cliff. And if anybody's seen the Lord of the Rings, and they're going up to Cirith Ungol on those steps, and Gollum is leading Frodo and Sam, that's what it looked like, and that's exactly what I felt like, because it was really steep and really wet, and it was foggy, and I couldn't see the top. But I got there, and this is what it looked like at the top. So you get to these sort of, it's really a peat bog. Everywhere you step off the trail, you sink up to your ankles in water, so it was quite wet. A bit more of the scenery. That's Buttermere down there. The weather had cleared for a little bit. And then we're heading down from the pass and down into the next valley, which is Borrowdale, and that's where I'd be spending the night. And around this part of the Lake District, they still mine slate for roofs. So this path I'm walking on actually was at one time a tramway where they had like railway cars bringing the slate up and down from the hills down to the valley. That's one of the slate mines that I passed that's not in operation anymore. And this was my destination for the night, Rosswaite. So you can see it's a very small village. There's only a small number of beds available in each place you stay, so it's good to book ahead. Day 3 was Rosswaite to Grasmere. It stopped raining, but you can see everything's still pretty wet. But it's really lovely scenery. There's all the dry stone walls and the hills, and sheep everywhere you turn. There's lots and lots of sheep. So this was the walk up the valley. You can see the weather's clearing up, and I took a picture looking up the valley and another picture looking back. The right one on the right is looking back at Rosswaite, so you get an idea of what the scenery is like. Getting up to the pass here, I had to climb that path on the left. You can see it kind of goes up right up the middle and then over to the right and up onto that cliff. It's really hard to see, but there are actually people on that path, so it kind of gives you an idea of the scale. And then the picture on the right is at the top. When you get to the top of that cliff, this is the view looking back again. And then this is the view looking the other direction towards Grasmere. So Grasmere is down there by that little lake, and I decided just to follow the top of this ridge. I could have gone down in the valley, but it was really wet, so I figured it was drier sticking up the top. And as you go along, you come to the end of that ridge, and this is called Helm Crag. And if those of you who are fans of William Wordsworth will know that's mentioned a number of times in his poetry. So it's one of the places that he used to walk up with his sister just for the view on a day when he just needed to get out of the house. This is the top of Helm Crag. And then down below where the lake is, that's Grasmere. And this is the churchyard in Grasmere. And if you see on the left, that's William Wordsworth's gravestone. And in the middle is Dorothy Wordsworth, his sister. They kept house together for a long time before he got married. And then on the right, it's harder to read, is John Wordsworth, who is Wordsworth's brother, who was a sailor. He didn't actually die here, but he stayed with them for a while. He died at sea, and they decided to erect this stone just in his memory. So I had a hard time taking this picture because there was about 30 tourists standing in line waiting to take this picture. It's very crowded in Grasmere, even in September. It's a very popular place for tourists. And that's where the Wordsworth stayed. It's called Dove Cottage. It's where he wrote a lot of his poetry, and it's a museum today. So if you're ever there, it's at night. They give you a really good tour. The next day, Grasmere to Patterdale, more of the Lake District. You can see the path leading out of Grasmere here up to another pass. And at the top of the pass is this lake. And I could have just gone to the end of the lake and down into Patterdale, which was my next destination. But it was a nice day. And I thought, I really want to go on one of the high peaks in the Lake District. And this is one of the things people do. They go up to, they call it bagging a peak. And so off to the left, there is a peak called Helvellyn. It's the 3rd highest peak in the Lake District. And I thought, well, I have to try at least one on my trip here because I'll probably never come back again. So when I got to the end of the lake, what I did was I climbed up that ridge you can see to the left to the top. And when you get to the top, it looks like this. It's pretty barren, just sheep and me for a long time. And you can see how the path just kind of stretches along the ridge. And as I got closer to the top, I started seeing more and more hikers because it was a weekend and there was lots of people coming up for the view. Even some mountain bikers made it to the top here. So you can see it's quite a view from the top. Now coming down, I decided I was going to do a route called Striding Edge, which is considered one of the classic traverses in the Lake Country, and it's a path that runs along the top of this ridge here. Again, it's really hard to see the scale. There are people hiking along there, but you can't really see them because they're so small. The problem with Striding Ridge is that in places the path is so narrow that only one person can pass at a time, and it's very steep on either side, so you have to be really careful. And on a weekend, there's 30 or 40 people trying to do it going in different directions, and it gets a bit crazy, but I did make it through. It was quite a great trip. Down the other side, and you can see Patterdale down in the valley there. That's where I would spend the night. And just sort of coincidentally, the next day when I left, I would be following that diagonal path that's almost right in the middle of the picture going up the hill on the far side. So that's where I would be heading out of the Lake District.